Compañeros, welcome to the SQL Data Partners podcast, the podcast dedicated to SQL Server-related topics, which is designed to help you become familiar with what's out there, how you might use those features, or ideas on how you might apply them in your environments. I am Carlos L. Chacon.
And I am Steve Stedman. We are two data professionals trying to help others get a better handle on their database environments, either through this podcast, our training, or our consulting practice. Thanks for joining us on the SQL Trail. Welcome to the show.
SQL Data Partners.
Hey, compañeros, Carlos Chacon here with episode 104. And as always, I have Steve along with me.
Hey, Carlos. This is a fun...
That's right. We're 4. And as always, I have Steve along with me.
Hey, Carlos. This is a fun episode today, I think.
That's right. We're kind of breaking away from the norm again. Well, from the technical. I shouldn't say it from the norm. Breaking away from the technical a little bit. And we've got Eugene Meidinger, who is with us. And we're going to be talking about keeping up with technology.
Yep.
Which is, always changing, right? So that question of how do you keep up with it if the target always moves kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those things that I think to stay relevant, you really need to be doing continuously. And I think that we've got some good ideas and some things that he mentions here that are really cool.
That's right. So Eugene works for All Lines Technology. He's up in the Pittsburgh area. And so I've been able to see him from time to time at some of the different SQL Saturdays. In fact, he was a guest panelist, if you will, on the SQL Saturday episode we did from Pittsburgh there last year. He's going through some of the back catalog, and he mentioned our conversation with Jonathan Stewart in episode 83 and Randolph West in episodes 81 and 82. I think we just kind of hit a sweet spot there with him, and he really enjoyed those episodes. So thanks, Vlad, for letting us know.
And we had another one from Irina Sviridova. I hope I've pronounced that correctly, and I'm apologizing if I haven't. She's from Canada. She says she's following our advice to connect on LinkedIn, and she is a regular listener of our podcast. And she says, please keep it up, and thank you.
Yes, well, thanks, Irina, for letting us know and for connecting.
Yep. And also, I've received a couple of in-person comments from people that I know around episode 100, and they thought that episode 100 was a lot of fun, and they enjoyed it.
Yes, that's right. Those still continue to trickle in.
Yeah.
So Mel Vargas and Brent Ozar both chimed in on about episode 100.
Yeah, for me, it was interesting. We were having a 4th of July party, and it came up in conversation. About how interesting episode 100 was. So that made me kind of happy.
Interesting. Yeah, that's funny. And so I guess I have to say, there's a couple of stories I wanted to tell, but haven't been able to tell yet. So I'll have to save that for another 150 or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so I sent out, I've been asking for feedback on the Compañero conference, and so I reached out to somebody that I had worked with. So she would not be an attendee. She's kind of a recruiter type. But again, I was just looking for feedback from different areas. And she responded to an email to this request that I had to review the site. And her first sentence was, it doesn't read like a professional conference. And so I was reading that, it kind of stopped me cold. And I'm like, oh, brother.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because we're trying to do a few things a little bit different.
Yeah, that's right. And I think as I read kind of the rest of her email, and from her vantage point of, again, she's not going to be an attendee, right? I think she's kind of more of like, I'm a vendor, right? Like I would go there to meet people, again, kind of from the recruiting type space. She has a different approach to it. And I guess I agree that we have a different tact. We definitely think it's going to be a professional conference.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
In the sense of from content and the people, the speakers that we have lined up, we think that's very straightforward. What is going to be a little bit different is, again, so the single track idea, and that we want to put a schedule there. We've put in, sessions with abstracts and things that, yes, this is the things you're going to come away with. But at the same time, it's going to be a little less structured in some instances, right? The goals for our conference are larger conference. At the same time, it's going to be a little less structured in some instances, right? The goals for our conference are different than for one of these larger conferences, I think.
Yep. And those goals, I know we were talking about them earlier prior to doing this recording, Carlos, but you want to talk about a little bit about those?
Yeah, so we've kind of put them together. The way I feel about the goals of the conference is that I want each attendee to make a new connection they can reach out to after the conference is over. Actionable item, at least one actionable item to be given in each session. So this might be a tool, a process, or an idea that they can execute. In some cases, it might be something they have to take back to their team to discuss, right? So it could be a discussion item.
But something that you could take away and use when you get home after the conference.
No, yeah, exactly. I think one of the things we were very specific about was that we want to introduce the new topics and the new feature speakers, right? And the new features are going to talk about what's coming down the pike. We do that regularly on the podcast. We wanted to make sure that the attendees could actually use some of this stuff, right? And just as an example, Query Store, it's great that you can know about that, but unless you're running 2016, it does you no good. Right. And so we wanted to make sure that people could take this information and act on it. And then that attendees would feel comfortable approaching the speakers, right? So again, kind of down to earth folks that are willing to chat, share their experience, and they're very knowledgeable.
Yep. I think that one's interesting because I know at other conferences that I've spoken at, it seems like in the 15-minute block right after you finish your presentation, that's when you get all the questions.
Right.
And then you maybe see people around the conference here and there, but you don't really have any conversation around that session after that, 15 to 20 minutes.
Something, right?
Then if you think about something an hour or two later, you can just go ask that speaker at the next break or intermission there to follow up at that point rather than having to go track them down somewhere.
Sure. Or how that might differ. And again, I'm, like a reporting type concept. So Jonathan's going to be there and he's more of a BI, person. So if we're talking about something, how would that apply and I'm just like Power BI or something, right? What would be different? How would I attach or tackle that problem differently? And again, those are the conversations that we're hoping to have happen. And which then leads into the next goal is that the schedule will not prohibit attendees from a learning opportunity. Right. So again, it's not that 15 minutes. It's not like, so there's one speaker who has an anniversary who won't be there right at the very beginning. She'll be coming in a little bit late, but we want to keep her family together. So it's
certainly
we want to keep her family together. So it's definitely important. But for example, the speakers are going to be there, right? It's not going to be like, hey, I deliver my session and then I leave type thing.
Yep.
And again, so that we're hoping that 15 minutes extends a little bit. And that the content is good and actionable. So, yeah, I think, is that different from some of the other conferences that are out there? Absolutely. But I think, again, that's by design.
Yep. And it's certainly, none of this is intended to make it not professional. I mean, everything's going to be completely professional that we do there.
Yeah, even, down to the venue. I mean, Slover Library is, it's very nice. There's glass walls. It's up on the 6th floor. We'd be kind of looking out. I think, if I remember correctly, you can see the water from over there. So it'll be very nice.
Yep.
And with that, so anyway, we hope to see everybody October 4th and 5th in Norfolk, Virginia. CompañeroConference.com for more details. Let's do a little SQL Server the news.
Now, there was something that you'd mentioned about monitoring SQL Server on Linux.
That's right. So one of the interesting things that I'm not sure that I thought completely through, and we've actually talked about SQL Server running on Linux. We had Travis, the program manager for that project, on the show. And one of the things that now that 2017 is getting ready to ship and they have early adopter customers, one of the things that the Microsoft CAT team, the support team, has to do is now monitor those environments. And so they put together a blog post about how they go about doing that, because where they would be using perfmon, it's no longer available to them, right? Because they're in a different operating system.
Right.
And this is I think, a focus more on, it's obviously the DMVs are there and what will be available. I think if they're still sorting some of that out, which I think you've found with the database health monitor, with a perfmon.
Doing what I can along the way to make sure that things work or will work, but until it's really done and a released product, Yeah, I'm not going to spend too much time battling some of those things.
Sure. And again, so they're trying to look at some of the visualization components as well, right? So they like with a perfmon to be able to, to visualize that. And so it was interesting that they go through, and there's actually, again, so in Linux, there's competing products because it's open source, or competing ways to go about doing some of that. And so they talk about a couple of them, but the one that they go into a bit of detail on is actually storing with Graphite Whisperer and InfluxDB, which I thought was kind of interesting, right? That they're pull this information out of SQL Server, stored it when I guess InfluxDB is, I'm assuming, is a database. And
I don't know what it is.
Some graphing tool. Yeah, I'm assuming is a database. And
I don't know what it is.
Some graphing tool. Yeah, you're using some graphing tool on top of it. So anyway, we'll have that in our show notes available. So if you want to take a peek at that, I'm not sure how many of our listeners are going to be, our early adopters there on the Linux version, but
that's one of those. If they are, we'd love to hear what you're doing and how it's working for you too.
No, that's true. Yes, please reach out and talk to us about that. I think particularly as it officially launches, which 2017, I'm assuming will be the third quarter, possibly the fourth quarter. Yeah, we'd love to have a conversation.
Yep.
So our show notes for today's episode will be at SQLDataPartners.com/keepup. Keep up.
Or at SQLDataPartners.com/104 with our episode number.
So with that, let's go ahead and jump into the conversation with Eugene. Eugene, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
A guest, perhaps unofficially before, on a couple of our panels in Pittsburgh and then Baltimore. You contributed to the conversation. We met, started talking, and we wanted to get you on the program. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, definitely.
I guess we should say welcome back.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I'm happy to be playing a starring role. I'm still mad at myself the first time because you're supposed to say your name whenever they give you the mic, and I forgot to do that. So I'm just like, guest speaker 3 or something like that on the first one.
The unknown voice with no credit.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So we apologize, but thank you. So thank you for being here and chatting with us today.
Yeah.
And ultimately, and so this is actually an interesting topic, and we had this as a SQL family question.
Right.
And I thought that you had an interesting take on this, right? So the question that we have is, how do you keep up with technology? It's all the different things that we have is, how do you keep up with technology? It's all over the place. And of course, we've even introduced since then kind of the SQL Server in the news segment. And it's just amazing, all the different things that continue to come out of Microsoft, let alone, all the other companies, out there. So I'll ask you the question. Let's get started here. How do you keep up with technology?
I think you have to just not sleep ever, and then you'll be fine. But for everyone else, anyone who happens to have a family or a significant other or kids or hobbies or just, a regular human body, you're not going to do a very good job of keeping up with technology. I think in many ways, it's not a very well-defined goal. I think it's more of an emotional fear, right? So
Interesting.
We're afraid of two things. We're afraid of losing our job or or becoming so irrelevant or obsolete that we can't easily change jobs anymore.
Sure.
That's the first thing. There's a large number of us who fear becoming that COBOL developer who's never updated his or her resume and maybe has a good job now or maybe has a job now, but there's a recession or they want to work somewhere else and they're out of luck.
Right.
I think that's a fear that's driving a lot of us. But then the other question or the other fear,
and I think there's one maybe lesser fear,
sure,
but I still kind of feel that it's out there. Is your a social situation? Hey, what is it that you do? I do COBOL, right? And even if you're a tech setting and they know what that is, right? You're going to get the
yeah,
you're really old,
Well, I can tell you something. I'm still technically in my 20s, and I don't put VB6 on my resume, but I know how to write VB6, doing all this stuff. And
yes,
carefully,
right.
Eugene.
Yeah, no, Ruby's basically VB6 with some prettier syntax. I mean, you could make the argument. Yeah, no, it's definitely looked down upon for being behind. And so one main thing is, you want to keep your job, but then also you want to keep your friends and family, right? Because I
Sure.
joked earlier that, okay, well, you could spend all of your waking hours reading books and watching videos and doing all this stuff, and you'd probably do a good job of keeping up with technology. But, for me personally, 9 to 10 p.m. is sacrosanct. We do not mess with that time. That is our date hour. Me and my wife are hanging out no matter what.
Very good. Good for you.
Yeah, it's important, and so there's balance. I think really what people want to know is how do I keep my job? How do I do it in a way that doesn't cause me all this grief and anxiety and frustration? Keeping up with technology itself, like it's impossible. I mean, you follow all the different things that are coming out with Azure. They just talked about Cosmos DB, where they took Document DB and then they slapped on 4 other different NoSQL database models, right? And you've got SQL Server 2017, right? I really hope we're not switching to an annual model, but they put Python in there. They've got all these other changes going on. There's just all this different stuff. And so you look at all the things, and I just don't think the way people define it, it's possible to keep up. There really is just too much stuff. Maybe 30 years ago, you could keep up with SQL, but today you can't, if you count everything, if you count all these different changes.
Yeah, this question perplexed me for a while, and I actually asked it when I was on SQL Cruise, which is another reason why we've been inspired to do the Compañero conference. When I was on SQL Cruise, which is another reason why we've been inspired to do the Compañero conference, because I was impressed, and I felt like there were a couple of people that did a pretty good job at keeping up. But I'm not sure, and not to say that they're not keeping up, but the more that you follow them, the more you kind of see some niching going on, and the more that you see content sharing, right? So that they're kind of sharing what other people are doing, so similar to what we're doing here, right? We don't know all the technologies, but we're bringing people on who do and can talk about it. And so that's one interesting facet that I've seen there. Sorry, Steve, you're gonna say something?
Oh no, I was just gonna say. So, given all this, it's nearly impossible to keep up with all technology or even all things SQL Server,
right?
But you need to keep up, but you need to keep your job, as you said, and keep your friends. And what do? How do you go about, I guess, staying relevant at that point?
Right. So one of the important things is having an awareness of what the problem is and what the challenges are, because I think there's a couple different sources of where this is actually a challenge, right? So one of the things that we're afraid of is our skills decaying. We're afraid of being that COBOL developer and our knowledge becoming less and less relevant over time. That's one challenge.
Right.
And there's a different challenge where we're worried about all these new technologies. Like I think the cliched example are JavaScript frameworks, where it seems like there's a new one every 6 months, right? And you don't know which is the right horse to bet on, which is the right choice to make. And I think 2 really big things, just talking about generalization and specialization. In my mind, specialization is how, right? Focus in terms and a degree of specialization. You need to figure out, okay, what do I want to go deep on? And it doesn't have to be, it's been gone deep. It doesn't have to be David Klieg deep, where, you've picked one singular thing and you are the world's expert. But you have to pick something to go deep on. And so that's going to require focus, right? Focus in terms of what things are you not learning? What is your specialization? Just setting aside time. And that's going to pay for the food today. That's going to pay the bills today. But then the other piece is that whole, do I learn Angular kind of piece? Or, in the data world, do I learn R? Do I learn Python? Do I learn Docker? That's going to make sure that you get paid 10 years from now. Generalization makes sure that you put food on the table a decade from now. And that's less about focus, and that's more about focus, and that's specialization. Make sure that you put food on the table a decade from now. And that's less about focus, and that's more about time. when you listen to podcasts, you're getting this exposure and you're generalizing. You're dealing with these unknown unknowns. And so I think the very first step is deciding, do you have a problem where you don't have enough specialization? Have you not gone deep enough? Or is the problem that you need to generalize more? Do you need to be more aware of what's out there? I think for a lot of people, they're scared of all the new stuff, but really they still need to make sure that they know where they want to go when they go deep and where they want to focus on for their career. So I think the first thing you need to do is decide, what's my actual problem? Do I need to go deeper or do I need to go wider? And what am I doing to deal with that?
Sure.
And to complicate it even more, I mean, in some cases, it might be, do I need to do both? Go deep.
Well,
That can be
if I
even more
think about
challenging.
it, I feel like going through the U.S. education system, right?
Sure.
And the three of us have gone to college, and
Yep.
that's kind of a route that we took. You get some exposure there, so that's kind of the generalization, if you will, right?
Yeah.
You start in information technology, you get your first tech job. From there, I think the most important thing is to go deep, right? Pick a couple of areas, and that could be a couple of different ways. So a tech stack, but also even just like an application stack. More and more we hear from the CIOs in some of the things they're looking for, in addition to the tech, is I want to know the business, right? So kind of understanding the pain points and how technology solves those things. And I think once you kind of get deep in, again, like you mentioned, just one area, then it will be easier because you understand the full.
People want to pay you money there. I mean, I think for a lot of people, like if you're out of college, your mission is to get past working at help desk, right? Your
Sure.
job is not to be learning Docker right now. Your job is probably not to be learning PowerShell or Hadoop or whatever the cool new next thing is. You're right. When you're coming out of college, your job is to get enough specialization that people want to pay you money to do something.
Right.
But part of that going deep too, like you said, is that, I do martial arts, and there's definitely a big difference between no belt and white belt and green belt and all these different things. And I'm a green belt right now, so I'm halfway there at the school that I go to. And sometimes you have to learn how to develop mastery in something. If you've never become an expert in an area, and again, I'm not talking like elite top 1% expert. To me, expertise starts whenever you first present to your local user group, or
there you
you
go.
write about develop expertise. It's the school that I go to. And sometimes you have to learn how to develop mastery in something. If you've never become an expert in an area, and again, I'm not talking like elite top 1% expert. To me, expertise starts whenever you first present to your local user group, or
there you go.
write a bunch of blog posts, anything where the stuff has to go in through your eyes and come back out your mouth. That's starting to develop expertise. It's on the far end of it.
Sure. Well, another, I guess I'll throw in another option there, because I'm a big fan of lunch and learns.
Right.
And I think, unfortunately, right, managers don't buy into it. The culture is, oh yeah, lunch and learn. You go bring your own lunch and we'll make you, make some poor schmuck, on something.
Yep.
And I wish that they would just say, you know what, we're going to, and again, they could be small groups, pay the whatever it is to bring in pizza, whatever, right? So that you can come and learn that they have for where you can go to conferences or get other training is his ability to be able to bring that back and then explain to the group what it is that he learned.
Right.
Which I thought was interesting. So, and again, so that's not deep specialization. It's just, I've listened to it. I have some comprehending, and now I'm going to get at least further enough along that I can now explain it to somebody else.
Yeah, anything that's going to be testing your mental model of something is going to help you with that. And like I was saying, I think that when you learn how to develop a certain level of mastery, that becomes repeatable. And so, like you said, when you come out of college, you need to learn how to go deep. And once you've done that successfully, you've actually gone truly deep somewhere, then now when you need to switch over to Hadoop or something like that, you can do that. Mm-hmm. For me, I get that with speaking, where the first couple presentations that I gave, there was a lot of there was a lot of fear and anxiety and a lot of work. And now I'm at the point where I understand kind of the backbone of a good presentation. And so it's a lot easier for me to say, oh, I need to give a presentation on Power Query in 2 weeks or something like that.
Mhm.
And start putting together that outline, putting together that structure, because I know what goes into it. And just the same exact thing with understanding what goes into actually developing mastery somewhere, even if that's a journeyman level, so to speak, and not a true expert.
So interesting. With that, really the key is on developing that first thing that you've mastered is not mastering it. It's figuring out the process of how to master it so that you can then translate that to the next thing you have to learn.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think a big part of that, like we talked about, is understanding kind of the difference between all these different learning things. Are they giving you exposure, or are they giving you mastery? Right? Are they a mental model of how that stuff works? And I think the big dividing line for that in a lot of cases is it active learning? Is it something where you have to write or type or speak or code or something so that you can actually test that model that's in your head? Because you can read all the books in the world or listen to all the blogs and listen to all the podcasts, but you need to have the rubber hit the road at some point. And that's truly how you develop a sense of mastery and expertise somewhere. And that's again why I say that I think mastery starts with that first user group presentation or that first blog post, because that's something that really tests your knowledge. Make sure you actually understand it at all.
Interesting. I can think of an example on that. What occurred in my experience was, I don't know, about 10 years ago, I was asked to help teach a class at a local university. And it was just a DBA class, and it was not the 7461, but a university. And it was just a DBA class, and it was not the 7461, but it would have been the equivalent of what the 70-461 exam was then. And then, like, right as I was about to start doing it, the person I was going to help out bailed out on it. So I was all on my own to go teach this 10-week class at a university. And for me, that was an incredible learning experience because it pushed me beyond what I knew at that point. And it made me learn it, not to the point that I could just talk about those things, but to the point that I could actually teach those things. And I think that was one of those things that jumping into it, I never expected that to happen. But I had to go deep on a whole lot of topics over that 10-week period. And by the time I came out of it, I was at a whole different level on what I knew about those kind of things. So I think your example of being able to take it as input and then give it as output through a presentation is a great way to learn, at least in my experience. I think your example of being able to take it as input and then give it as output through a presentation is a great way to learn, at least in my experience.
Right. Then the next benefit, I have to think again, kind of, because now that you've mastered, you've done that specialization, is that as you go into the generalization components, if you will, right? So,
Right.
i.e., talking with others at a conference, listening to the podcasts, talking to a vendor, talking to a coworker, right? Potential employer, things like that. You can then pick up on how their topic, or whatever, whether that's technology, an idea, a process, how that overlaps into what you already know, or how it doesn't, and then be able to speak to that, to help that conversation continue to flow. And I guess I'm thinking more of a job interview process, because that's kind of what we were at. And I can't say that I've gotten all the jobs that I've ever applied for. That's not true. But I feel like that ability to be able to speak to the things that they have brought up has definitely been at least something that they've had to consider in looking at different applicants.
So, you're talking about a job interview or even just talking with people. I think that by having a rich mental model, rich understanding of something, it gives you the capacity for analogy. Even if it's an awkward analogy or a strained analogy, it at least gives you that option. So a good example is all this big data stuff. Right. At some point, I want to start learning about Hadoop and Spark and all these other technologies. And right now, I'm still at that exposure phase. I don't know pretty much anything, but when I start looking into them, I was joking with Kevin Fiesel, one of your big podcast cameos.
Yeah.
That wait a minute, Scala is just like kind of like SQL. What is it? It's like that application. It's like whatever the SQL data warehouse project is, that appliance kind of thing that they sell. I forget the exact name. Parallel data warehouse. It's like parallel data warehouse or that sort of thing. So whenever you have some area that you've gotten that richness with, when someone talks about something in a completely different area, you at least have the option to go, well, I don't know anything about that, but from what you've said, it sounds a lot like X.
Right.
You know, or even something simple. When you understand how a transaction log works with SQL Server, you're going to be able to make some really good guesses about how it probably works with MySQL or Postgres or Oracle or something like that. There's a lot of those things that'll translate. And even if it's not a one-to-one translation, at least now you have a jumping board. Whereas if you're a jack of all trades, you don't really have a good way to tell if that comparison, that analogy feels jumping board. Whereas if you're a jack of all trades, you don't really have a good way to tell if that comparison, that analogy feels right or not.
Yeah, interesting. Now, to jump back in here, you have an interesting analogy in keeping up with technology, and you model it after radioactive decay.
I do. Well, I think it's a good way to think about it because, again, if we talk about the beginning and how keeping up with technology is this nebulous, anxious sort of thing. It makes me think a lot about when we talk about the cloud, which originally was just some guy going, oh, well, this internet thing's undefined. I'm just going to draw a cloud. And then we decided that's our branding, right?
Right.
That's our marketing plan. You know, keeping up with technology is whatever makes me not feel so nervous at night when I go to bed that I'm going to lose my job, right? That's keeping up with technology. I wanted some mathematical way, because I'm a giant nerd, of thinking about this, of actually working through. I think that of actually working through this, and to me, radioactive decay makes a lot of sense because when you're dealing with, say, let's say you have a pound of uranium, and I'm no physicist, but I learned some basics in school. You've got a pound of uranium. That uranium is going to have something called a half-life, which simply put is just how long till you only have half of it. You know, you could apply that to a bunch of things, but radioactive materials are pretty consistent in that half-life is stable. And so I think that knowledge, IT knowledge, also has a half-life. Now, what you say it is can vary. Now, sure. Alan White, he says that every 5 years you have to retool yourself. And I remember on the first time I was on this podcast, he said that, and I said, well, I've been doing this for 5 years. Does that mean I have to start over? But, you know, in college, I would joke about the same thing. I'd say half of what you know is useless in 5 years. And that's how it really feels. And maybe it's 10 years or 20, but the idea remains.
Sure.
But let's say it is 5 or 20, but the idea remains.
Sure.
But let's say it is 5. Well, you can mathematically model that, right? You can say, okay, what percentage would I retain each year so that in 5 years, I've only got half that knowledge? And it turns out that percentage is 87%. That means that if you know 100 things that are not COBOL, you know 100 things that are still relevant today, then if your half-life, your IT half-life is 5 years, that means that 13 of them either fell out of your head or are no longer applicable, right?
Interesting.
13 of them are either VB6 or something you haven't done so long you forget how to do, or it's
sure.
DTS or whatever.
Yeah, you kind of know it, but you wouldn't want to be asked to do it again.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that kind of gives you a way forward, because if you think of it that way, then we've got 3 knobs that we can kind of twist to try out having a better, learn more stuff. You just shove as much stuff in as you can, because
so instead of 100, it's 150.
Right, exactly. If you need to learn 13 things a year just to tread water, then if you can learn 20 or 40 or 50 or whatever, then the total amount of relevant knowledge you have is going to increase.
Right.
The second knob that you have is you can learn more of the right things. So that's about having a better focus. That's about having a plan. That's about improving the signal to noise ratio, right? Because you can spend that 160 hours in your entire week reading Twitter and Hacker News, but you're going to learn a lot about local elections or, Golang or Rust or some local startup or what Zuckerberg is up to this week. And even the technology things may not be relevant to where you
staying away from,
or, Golang or Rust or some local startup or what Zuckerberg is up to this week. And even the technology things may not be relevant to where you want to go or what fits your knowledge, or just there's a lot of junk out there. There's a lot of low quality material. So if the first thing is to learn more things, the second thing is to learn more of the right things. Learn more of the things that fit with what you want. Go ahead.
So staying away from bleeding edge stuff, right? Kind of wait until you start to see some more adoption. Maybe early adopter, right? Maybe is the phase, and you're like, oh, okay, that's what I'll jump onto because I'm seeing it more widely used, things like that.
One of the strategies with dealing with the bleeding edge stuff is, make a low investment with that, right? So that's why stuff like this podcast is so great, because you can spend an hour while you're doing something else and get enough to be conversational with that bleeding. Does this fit with my career? And now I want to go deep. So that's the second thing, is just learn the right things. The third knob that we have is that radioactive decay, that how quickly does my knowledge become obsolete? And that relates to what you just said as well, is learn things that last. Learn things that last longer, right?
Sure.
So things that don't last is stuff tied to a specific version, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So the exact feature set that happens to be in SQL 2005 is perhaps not too useful to you.
Sure.
Right.
But understanding how to use some of those features that came in there, or understanding how to use some of the advanced window functions that came with 2012, that is going to last longer. Certain types of technologies are just immature. Again, I joke about stuff like Angular, where they're breaking releases every 6 months, but you have that in the big data space,
sure.
right?
Yep. Sure.
It's the hot new thing, but I'll tell you what. There's a great site called Big. It's true.
What? Now I have to look it up.
You can look it up.
Keep going.
Go and look it up. So it'll give you a name like Paula or Horsey, or I forget some of the other ones. And it'll say, is this a big data program or is this a Pokemon? And then you'll click on the button and then it'll tell you if you're right or wrong. And you're going to be wrong a lot of the time. It's true. It's great. Wow. It's the best site ever.
Okay, here we go. So I'm here. So GitHub.io. Okay, we'll put it up on the show notes.
Yeah.
And so the first name is Horsia.
Right.
Horsia.
Right.
Now I happen to be a Pokemon player for the kids, for my children.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
I have 5 kids.
Family bonding. I get it.
That's right. So Horsia. So big data or Pokemon?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking the group.
I'm pretty sure that one is a Pokemon.
Yeah, I'm going Pokemon too. Steve, you're gonna go against us?
I'll go with
I'm asking the group.
I'm pretty sure that one is a Pokemon.
Yeah, I'm going Pokemon too. Steve, you're gonna go against us?
I'll go with the group on that one.
Oh, here we go. Pokemon.
Like I've heard of big data.
Yeah, it is a Pokemon, and I even got. Okay, here we go. Vulpix.
Okay, that's definitely a Pokemon.
Definitely a Pokemon. Yep.
I had a childhood, I promise you.
Here's a softball one. Hadoop.
That is a big data.
Yeah. That's definitely big data. Yeah, we know that.
All right.
Here we go. So maybe one that we don't I'm not sure of anyway. Spoink.
Yep.
Spoink.
I'm going to guess big data.
Yeah, that sounds like something someone would make up for a big data company.
Okay.
It sounds like a tech name.
It is a Pokemon.
Oh, wow.
Look at that.
Terrible.
Okay, that is funny. Okay, so thank you. So I don't know if I should thank you or send you a nasty email now for introduce me to the site, because I have to go through and.
It depends on how much time you waste. Is really
exactly
when you have so many of these big data technologies. Even within Hadoop, you've got all these goofy names. You've got Pig and Scoop and Flume and Hive and HDFS and all this stuff. You because it's immature, you don't want to make a huge time investment, right?
Yeah,
these
exactly.
These are things that are going to decay quickly, because it's going to be like some sort of ultimate battle, and by the end of it, one's going to be standing with the crown, and you don't know which one it is right now.
Sure. Almost. Now there's a lot more players in it, but it almost reminds me of what was it, Blu-ray, and what was the other technology? All of a sudden, I can't. It was like something.
It was like something DVD. Yeah, it was like HD
DVD.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Or even, going back VHS and Betamax and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Exactly.
And so bleeding edge technologies are something that don't last. But, let's talk about what things do last. And we hinted at some of these things, but things you can learn that last. One of the biggest ones is people skills.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
That's
true.
Skills.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
That's
true.
People do not change, or if they do, it's much, much slower in terms of centuries than it is the dog years that it is with technology.
For sure. You're
So
talking
Oh,
about
yeah.
decades, right? Or generation, right? Rather than
yeah, grammar doesn't change that quickly. I can promise you. So if you can learn how to write a good email, or I have a blog post about how to write a good abstract, that's going to last the test of time. Along that same vein, public speaking skills. You guys do consulting, and I've learned myself that if you can stand up in front of 50 people and pretend like you know what you're talking about, you can do it with 2.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier. Learning the trick of, well, I don't know, but I think it will work this way, and I'll get back to you. I'll get you an answer.
Sure.
Those kinds of soft skills are timeless. Truthfully,
You're not insinuating that we're just making this stuff up, are
no.
you?
I think I implied it. I don't know if I insinuated. The distinction is lost on.
So it would be
Yeah.
really interesting as we go through these different items if there was
Yeah.
like a periodic table of skills that you could look and say, well, the half-life on public speaking is 200 years, but the half-life on big data is 9 months.
Right.
Interesting.
And try and do a comparison that way to figure out, okay, if you need to increase your skills overall, what are the ones that you can either increase that are going to last and last for a long time versus what can you learn quickly
Right.
that might be a risk, but it may pay off in the short term, but it's going to be very different 5 years from now.
Right.
Yeah, I would say the people skills are definitely the noble gases of the skill world because they're not reactive. They last forever. But another thing that lasts long is, I think, we talked about it, going deep, understanding theory, fundamentals, and internals.
Sure.
Going that one layer below and understanding how, we talked about it, going deep, understanding theory, fundamentals, and internals.
Sure.
Going that one layer below and understanding how something actually works, because it's so much easier to transfer that, but it also lets you make certain guesses and inferences. It lets you say, I'll give you a perfect example. I have literally thanked Paul Randall twice for his transaction log course because it's saved me so much just understanding that. Like a simple example is dealing with availability groups. If you don't know how the transaction log works on a internals level, availability groups are such a huge pain. Because, you're like, well, why can't I sync this? Or you say, well, okay, which do I have to take backups on both sides, or just all these things? But if you understand how it actually works, then you can intuit a lot of things. You can intuit, okay, if I'm taking a backup right now, is the transaction log going to learn more things, learn the right things, and then learn things that last? And that things that last is going to come down to the deep stuff, fundamentals, internals, some of that hands-off stuff. And then it's going to be those people skills. It's how to write, it's how to read, it's how to communicate, it's how to learn in general, that kind of stuff. So those are, I think, the 3 different approaches you can take, because the first 2 increase just your inputs, and then the last one decreases that radioactive decay. So if you know 100 things, if your half-life, if you can shift that from 5 years to 6 years, right? If you can make that tiny little shift, then, still learning just 13 things a year, you're going to end up knowing 120 instead of 100, right? So just slowing that decay, you're going to know more relevant stuff as a result over time.
Interesting.
Very cool. Yeah.
And as you say that, I think I'm really glad I'm not a JavaScript developer because I think that the half-life there
terrible.
would,
it's like 6 months.
If even that, maybe.
Well, like I said, I know that Angular is coming out with like build number changes, like full number changes. I think the plan is supposed to be every 6 months or something like that. And I'm still mad about like SQL when it was coming out every 2 years. So I don't know how I would deal with that.
Yeah, that's right. Different worlds, right?
Yeah.
Getting all the DevOps love over on that side.
Well, it's sneaking over to SQL World for sure. All the
there's no
DevOpsification. Yeah.
No question. It's well on its way. Well, Eugene, great information, and I guess we should note that if people wanted to extend the conversation a little bit, or actually hear you present this, your presentation at the Group I conference will be available. Yeah, I'm sure it will be posted.
Okay, what is my
SQL family? Just summarize a little bit of where we're at. And
so yeah, just to summarize everything, you have to figure out, okay, what is my real problem? Is it that I need to go deeper with things, or I need to be learning more things? And if I'm going deeper, I need more focus. I need a plan. I need scheduled, set aside time, because doing active learning is hard. It requires focus. That's the fuel for deep learning. The fuel for generalization and broad learning is time. But you can listen to podcasts while you're exercising or doing the dishes or commuting. You can learn some of these things without giving it your full attention. And you don't often want to give it your full attention because it's so volatile. But really, a lot of it comes down to three big things. You know, if it's like this radioactive decay where our knowledge is continually fading in relevancy, you can either learn more things, which means putting in more time, more energy, or more. It comes down to three big things. You know, if it's like this radioactive decay where our knowledge is continually fading in relevancy, you can either learn more things, which means putting in more time, more energy, or more money in some sort of way. You can learn the right things by, say, leaning on curation, making sure you're dealing with stuff that's good quality, or having a plan and making sure that stuff fits in with your plan. Or you can learn things that are going to last longer, that are going to last more than 5 years and not become irrelevant, that aren't just the hot new thing. And generally that comes down to, going truly deep and learning internals or fundamentals or theory. Or it means learning people skills or business skills, things that haven't changed nearly so rapidly over the past 10 or 20, 30 years, things that sometimes don't change for generations. So that would be my general advice with trying to keep up with technology. You may not be able to truly keep up with technology, but you can find a way to keep your job and keep your friends without so much angst and so much.
Okay. So how did you first get started with SQL Server?
So it was largely by accident, if I'm being honest. I took a database course in college, and that was using MySQL as a backend. I helped TA'd for that class later, and so the different professor was using Access. And then later I did a non-credit intern project and did all the development work, and that was using MySQL. So up until my first long-term job, my current job, no experience with SQL Server, didn't know it was a thing. And then I'm looking for a job after my first one, and the job says .NET/SQL developer. And I'm like, great, I always want to do software engineering, do a lot of programming, this will be perfect. Well, I thought it was going to be 80% .NET and 20% SQL, and it was flipped.
Oh.
And half of that was DBA stuff. And I remember my first month Googling up what the difference is between a view, a store procedure, and a function, because I didn't know any of that at the time. I could do my select star, I could do my where, and that was about it. But I just learned on the job, and I got involved, and then I found out that, user groups are a thing. And I started going to the local SQL user group in Pittsburgh, and then I found out SQL Saturdays are a thing. I'll tell everyone here, don't go to the after party because you'll end up as a speaker. I got cornered by Gina Walters, who was running the group, and Rick Hygus, who's a former past board member. And they're like, you should present. And I said, I'm not qualified. And they said, you should present anyway. And so I gave my first presentation on execution plans. And then I was terrified, but I loved it. And I just kept going from there.
Good deal.
All right. Good stuff.
Now, in all that time working with SQL Server, if there's one thing you could change about it, what would it be?
I know this has been said before, but licensing. I would change licensing. When you start taking back, it was just one simple guide. Like I get, okay, we've got like free or express, and we've got standard and enterprise. Microsoft wants their money. They see Oracle doing their thing. I get it. But then you throw in stuff like, okay, if you have a cold standby, that one's free.
Yeah.
Well, in 2014, we changed that. Now you have to have software assurance for it to be free. But the moment you start taking backups, you're doing production work, so it doesn't count anymore. And it's just all these little nuances are just really overwhelming. So licensing by far, I would change.
And then if you have that license, you could take it to the cloud, but then you have to count it. And then,
now they've got hybrid.
Failing over. And
Wow.
if you're in the cloud for too long, and that's different licensing. And
Yeah, that's definitely one that would be worth straightening out a little bit.
Right.
So what's the best piece of career advice that you've ever received?
So I'll give you two, because the best piece of career advice I know of, I got out of a book. So I don't know if I'd count that as receiving it, but this really great book that I was given by a friend in my first job, and it's How to Have Confidence and Power in Dealing with People, which sounds really fancy, but it's a lot of commonsensical stuff of just how to work with people and talk with people and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And for someone who was this introverted nerd who didn't know how to work with other people, it was big. And the biggest thing out of that book, and the best career advice that I've ever found in my career, is paraphrase what people say, repeat it back to them to make sure you're on the same page. Just ask, hey, do you mind if I paraphrase that to make sure we're on the same page? And then just repeat back what you heard, because there's so many times that you heard something different than they said. And even if you got it right, it lets them know, okay, as for received, definitely something that's recent and sticks in my mind is from Erin Stellato, where I had talked to her about, hey, I want to get a job in big data or data analytics or something like that. And she said, make the job that you want to have, in the sense that instead of thinking, oh, well, I'm going to have to find some other job, well, I can look for opportunities to say, hey, boss, I did a little bit of R with some of our internal metrics, and here's what I was able to find, or just something to shape the job that I'm already in to something more of what I want it to be 3 years from now, or something like that.
Okay, great.
Like that's something huge.
Yeah, and not to bang this drum, compañeros here, you'll forgive me, but I think that idea is, if you can tie the technology to a business scenario, I would be willing to wager 99% of the time you're going to get to think that idea is, if you can tie the technology to a business scenario, I would be willing to wager 99% of the time you're going to get to do that project, assuming budgets and, all of that stuff is all in order, right? But if you can prove value to the business by it, much easier scenario, right? Much easier conversation than, hey, I want to do big data, right? I have this problem and I think I can solve it. Now, having said all that, our last question for you today, Eugene, if you could have one superhero power, what would it be and why do you want it?
Yeah, I'm terrible with this question, because I'd want to be able to learn mildly useful things really quickly, because I feel like most superpowers would be just way too obvious, way too intrusive. Like, Carlos, if you're flying around to work or whatever, people are going to notice, and then you've got paparazzi and all this kind of stuff, right?
Gotcha. Okay.
Or, if we're learning sign language, the FBI is just going to kidnap you and dissect you and figure out what's going on. But there's all these minor little skills that I'm interested in that are useful, but no one would go, I wonder what happened to him. Like, I want to learn lip reading someday, or lock picking, or something that my wife and I are learning right now is sign language. Like, she is fully capable hearing, no problems there at all. Well, okay, maybe sometimes she can hear me as well. But we're learning sign language because, one, it's just this cool thing, but two, it legitimately is something useful in these occasional situations.
Yeah, right.
Right? So if you're at a loud concert, or you're 30 feet away from each other, you can still communicate.
For sure.
And right now, our repertoire is pretty limited. We mostly can say, hey, I'm going to the restroom, or, oh, look at that cute child. But we still get some value out of it right now. So my superpower would be learning all these, like, mildly useful little skills.
We've done this
for other people.
Lots of attention.
Yeah,
There
right.
you go.
I'll second you there on the sign language. So my wife and I actually took a class when we were in college together.
Nice.
And it hasn't been super useful outside of teaching our kids, and they were growing up, some sign language, like terrible twos time, where they can't quite talk. They want to communicate. That's been the best thing. Eugene, thank you so much for being on the program today.
You're very welcome. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Eugene. Really enjoyed it.
So after we had done this interview, Steve, I know you had some interesting takeaways.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed it, but there were some different point of views than what I had really thought about that way before. And I think that one of them was around this tension between generalization and specialization.
Sure.
And sort of looking at specialization pays the bills, and generalization. Been an employee on this tension between generalization and specialization.
Sure.
And sort of looking at specialization pays the bills, and generalization keeps you relevant, and that they both have different learning styles.
Yep. And different times when you need to be paying attention to one versus the other.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Right.
And I think that having been an employee and currently as a consultant, I think that those, considering the specialization and the generalization, is very different in those two roles.
Sure.
And that oftentimes in a regular employee role, you're more focused on what's needed for your current environment. Whereas in like a consulting role, you're more focused on what's needed for many clients' environments.
Sure. Kind of what's coming down the road, with the hopes that you can latch onto that and get some work out of it.
Yep. And then time and energy or focus and money. And the comment was that money is the most plentiful of the three. And I think that's one that it tends to vary quite a bit, because throughout my career, there's been times where I've had less money and I've had way more time. And there's been times where I've had very little time and more money. And I think that it's kind of depends at what point you're at there and what you're doing. So I think that the point behind that was that no matter what no matter who you are, we have a limit on time. And once time's gone, you can't get more of it. You've only got so much time in your life, basically.
Right.
But however, with the money side of it is that, you can make more money to pay for whatever it is that you're doing to maximize your learning there. The point there is that if you can afford the training, to pay for some type of training that will get you in a position where you can, is that if you can afford the training, to pay for some type of training that will get you in a position where you can learn faster, it may put you in a much better position. And I think the point there was about how he said being willing to lean on curation and pay money for good content. Now, you don't want to throw money after bad content, but if you can get the right stuff to get you in the right position, I think you can get ahead much quicker that way.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot more plentiful. There will continue to be content, coming out the wazoo, right? And so, unfortunately, now we have where maybe 10 years ago we were having a problem trying to find content. Right? We'd have to go to a class, right? Like these 4-day workshops or whatever, and the people would just read us the slides, and we'd be bored to death, And now we have to okay, there's so much content. Yeah, like you mentioned, I need it to be curated, right? To be filtered, because I don't have time to.
Can make a big difference. Learning more things, learning more of the right things, and learning more of the right things that will last. And I think that there's things I learned 20 years ago that are still incredibly valuable. But then there's also things I learned 5 years ago that weren't the right things, and they're not worth anything today. So,
no, exactly.
Being able to have the right strategy to learn on those things can make a big difference there in getting ahead.
And it's funny, and I know I've mentioned this before, but this is kind of where we as technologists probably don't do a very good job, and we could probably get better returns, if you will, by looking to our business, brothers and sisters, in the sense of trying to find where things are going. We tend to be very focused on what we want to do or what kind of suits us, but where industry is going will help play a role. There's some indicators there, but that means we have to learn about the way other people are doing things. And there may not be necessarily a direct correlation to what it is that we want to do or that we are doing.
Right. And I think that correlation is important, because I can remember there's been many times that I've thought, wow, this is a really cool topic that I want to learn about. And I learn all the ins and outs around whatever that item is. And I find out that, oh, that's really interesting, but it's not very relevant to anything I'm doing today.
Right. No, exactly. So if you want to follow up, Eugene has put out some information out on his blog at sequeleugene.com, and we'll put a link up to his post on keeping up on the website at sequeldatapartners.com/keepup.
Yep. And again, that URL is www.sequelegene.com/keepingup. And you can get the show notes
to us. You can do so on social media. We always enjoy when people connect with us on LinkedIn. I am at Carlos L. Chacon.
And you can find me on LinkedIn at Steve Stedman. and we'll see you on the SQL trail.
SQL Data Partners.